Being released from WWE when all you're really doing is sitting around in catering collecting a paycheck is bad enough, but the company cutting you when you're in the middle of a seemingly important program and on television every single week? Brothers, that's a whole different bag of bollocks. I'm Andy for What Culture Wrestling, and here are 10 WWE wrestlers released in the middle of a push. Number 10. Big Cass. It's great that Big Cass recently landed in Impact Wrestling as W. Morrissey, because he's had a rough couple of years and he seems like a nice guy, and on top of that, his WWE run didn't exactly end the way he would have wanted it to. Cass was actually handpicked as Daniel Bryan's first major singles feud when Bryan came out of retirement following his return from injury in 2018. And even though Bryan picked up a couple of wins over the 7-footer, those victories were soiled by post-match big lad beatdowns that seemed to be suggesting that Cass was finally going to get the W over Bryan in what would have easily been the biggest win of his career. Instead, reported behavioral issues backstage, including a direct Vince McMahon order by booting a little person in the head on live TV, saw Big Cass let go by WWE just 2 months after his return to television. Number 9. Emma. Now, being released by WWE when you're just kind of on television quite a lot is one thing. But when Emma was let go by WWE, she was consistently rubbing shoulders with Raw heavy hitters like Sasha Banks, Bayley, and Charlotte Flair, and of course, the Raw Women's Champion, Alexa Bliss. And not just that, she was also Asuka's first pay-per-view opponent on the main roster, facing her old NXT TakeOver rival at TLC 2017 after toppling the likes of Banks, Bayley, Alicia Fox, and Dana Brooke for the privilege. The former Emelina obviously lost to Asuka at TLC. Then she followed that up by losing a shorter rematch on the following night's episode of Raw, before being released from WWE less than a week later. Grim. Number 8. Mr. Kennedy, and no, I'm not going to say it like he does. I can't pull that off. Returning from a spell on the sidelines shortly after becoming Mr. Money in the Bank, Mr. Kennedy was revealed as Vince McMahon's bastard son, with the move seemingly designed to position him as one of the biggest rising stars in the company, and it put him in a heated rivalry with Triple H. The problem was, the Triple H feud had to be dropped when Mr. Kennedy was suspended after being implicated in a steroid scandal, and he ended up getting released from WWE about 20 months later in May 2009. The reason why it was such a shock at the time was because it appeared like he was being positioned as a big dog, a big deal, on Raw. He was the brand's #1 draft pick in the supplemental WWE draft just a few weeks before he was let go. Just when it looked like he was about to get another go at becoming a top guy in the company, off he went into the free agents pool. Number 7. Marty Jannetty. It's an elite class of wrestler who has been released from WWE more than once, but Marty Jannetty, that trailblazer, has been fired from the company more times than pretty much anybody else in company history. For 2 of those firings, the former rocker was in the middle of major pushes pitting him against ex-tag partner Shawn Michaels. The first one came in the aftermath of the infamous barber shop window incident. The wheels were in motion for Rocker versus Rocker at WrestleMania 8, but the match didn't happen. Why? Because Marty got himself fired after assaulting a police officer and getting placed under house arrest for 6 months. Rehired later that year, Jannetty once again reignited his rivalry with Michaels, challenging for the Intercontinental title at Royal Rumble 93. Instead of the feud continuing for months as was planned, Marty was let go following claims that he was inebriated while wrestling Shawn at the Rumble. Number 6. Eric Rowan. 4 months. 4 bloody months. That's how long wrestling fans were teased with the mystery of what was in Eric Rowan's tiny little cage before it was finally revealed to be a mechanical bloody spider. It was one of the weirdest reveals in WWE history, but honestly, a real hoot for anyone who likes their wrestling so bad it's actually hilarious. If this was WWE's idea of a push, and who would put this beyond Vince McMahon, it was a pretty wacky one. But Eric was lining up with the likes of Seth Rollins and Aleister Black on television almost every week, so things were looking pretty rosy for him. That is, of course, until Drew McIntyre came along, hilariously squashing the spider while it was still in its cage, and oh dear, Oh dear, poor Eric. He was served his walking papers as part of the company's mass cuts on the 15th of April 2020, and he hasn't been seen in WWE since then. Number 5. Aleister Black. Aleister Black was gone from WWE television for half a year before finally returning with his Tales of the Dark Father series in April 2021. A few weeks later, having been launched into a televised feud with Big E, Black was let go, with the company citing budget cuts as the reason. As reported by Fightful Select, WWE had no long-term plans or endgame for the feud with Big E. They had even instructed their creative team to stop coming up with pitches for Black before they let him go. And, you know, hearing this story, it's almost like this company is creatively bankrupt or something. Number 4. UMAGA. UMAGA, or UMANGA as my close personal friend William Regal would say, was such an awesome, fearsome character and a consistently featured player in rivalries with the likes of Batista, Triple H, and of course, most famously, John Cena. When he was released, it came completely out of left field. UMAGA was fresh off a CM Punk feud that saw the two of them trading victories on pay-per-view. The last match went down at Extreme Rules 2009 when Punk was victorious, going on to cash in his Money in the Bank briefcase and become World Heavyweight Champion. While many thought that UMAGA might continue to target Punk, particularly now that he had the big gold belt on his shoulder, the Samoan was actually fired the very next day for reportedly refusing to enter rehab after violating the wellness policy. Number 3. BART GUNN. The great hope of the Brawl for All was that JR's hand-picked guy Dr. Death Steve Williams would win the ill-advised shoot fighting tournament and enter a potentially money-spinning feud with Steve Austin. Those hopes were dashed when BART GUNN battered and injured Dr. Death and soon found himself in the WrestleMania spotlight, the likes of which he could never have imagined before until he was sent to the Shadow Realm by Butterbean. Soon after, Big Bad Bart was handed his big bad walking papers, having just been humiliated in a fight he never stood a chance in on the international stage. Not a good look. Number 2. Ultimate Warrior. The famously hard-to-work-with Warrior was fired from WWE on multiple occasions and was always a pushed commodity whenever Vince McMahon had him on the roster, with original plans for his comebacks in 1992 and 1996 featuring tentative plans to give him the world title. Of course, neither of these reigns came to be. In 1992, Warrior was let go from the company weeks before he was set to be in the main event of Survivor Series, with Vince McMahon explaining that the big homophobe's experiments with growth hormones led to his demise. Then, in 1996, Warrior was let go after another cup of coffee in Stamford, fired for missing shows after allegedly lying about the death of his father. And yeah, I mean, generally not a nice guy at all, Warrior. And at number 1, Muhammad Hassan. Thrown into a rivalry with The Undertaker in July 2005, Muhammad Hassan was manhandling the dead man in ways we'd never seen before, but his wrestling career was thrown all the way up in the air by the atrocities of the terrorist bombings in London on the 7th of July. In a segment that was taped 3 days earlier but aired the very same night, Hassan and 5 masked attackers brutalized The Undertaker in extremely uncomfortable fashion. A major backlash followed due to A, the segment happening, period, and B, WWE choosing to air the segment fully aware of the acts that had just taken place in London hours before. Hassan was kept off television for a couple of weeks before being squashed by The Undertaker at the Great American Bash. From there, the character was removed from all WWE programming, while Hassan would be released in September and later announce his retirement. In terms of his push, it was revealed in the subsequent years how Muhammad Hassan was due to beat The Undertaker before dethroning Batista for the World Heavyweight Champion at SummerSlam, which, by the way, was due to go down in Washington, D.C. Just think about that one for a second. And on top of this, it would have actually made him the youngest world champion in WWE history at just 23 years old. Instead, Hassan basically never wrestled again. So that's our list, but what do you guys think? Let us know down in the comment section below. After that, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. Then, you can follow us on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE and myself at Andy H. Murray, where you can tell me how wrong I am. Goodbye.